Kid, the space-traveling little girl on a mission to recover time, and Astro Bot, PlayStation's space-exploring robot on a mission to save his friends. These two may seem like funny little goobers with not much else going on, but underneath the charming exterior lies some powerful fighters with a lot to give. But how much can either one give in a straight fight to the death with each other? That's what I'm going to figure out today in this first episode of a new series. But before I do, I want to lay out the ground rules for how this series will operate. Rule number 1, all official material that is considered a canon part of the character's story is included for each character. Side material can also be considered viable so long as the character remains consistent with their main self, but unless otherwise specified, I won't be including extra crossovers the character happens to be a part of, like Smash Bros for example. In this case, Hat Kid and Astro Bot would each get the base game of A Hat in Time, its various DLCs, and some officially licensed mods, and the 3 games Astro Bot Rescue Mission, Astro's Playroom, and Astro Bot respectively. But they wouldn't get their crossovers with Framemakers or Fall Guys. Hat Kid does also have 2 official guest appearances with games Tunche and Here Comes Nico, but only the former would actually matter since she's just chilling on vacation in the latter. Rule number 2, within the confines of this official media, I will be giving them access to anything and everything they reasonably have access to, whether that's specific items and abilities they are known to have, or any specific feats of strength, speed, and durability. This doesn't mean I won't scrutinize any abilities or feats, however, because in the Great Versus landscape, you're bound to come across dubious claims for a lot of characters, and these two are no exception. Rule number 3, the win condition for any fight I examine is either death or incapacitation. That seems to be the way most regular versus shows and analysis videos go, so I might as well follow suit with them. But in the event where it's not plausible for either character to really kill each other, which happens way more often than you'd think, incapacitation by any means will also be treated as a valid win condition. And yet, even that's not plausible sometimes. Some people make stupidly OP characters just because they can. Whatever the case, those are the rules we've set, so now we can get this show on the road and find out who really wins between Hat Kid and Astro Bot. Somewhere in the vast reaches of space lies a planet split up into several regions. A town overrun by mafia, a studio of bickering birds, a forest ruled by a sleazy specter, and so much more. Each of these regions had their own stories to tell, with people living their own lives. But a new story that would change all their lives forever would begin with the arrival of a little alien girl with a big top hat in a bigger ship. This is Hat Kid, a little girl piloting her spaceship across the cosmos in order to get back home from wherever she once was. And with magical timepieces as her fuel, she was well on her way there. Until a mafia goon somehow got all the way up to her ship and broke a hole in her hull, causing her to crash land onto the planet and lose all her timepieces too. Now she's on a mission to get them all back and go home. Being a small girl, she's quite agile on her feet, able to jump, double jump, dive, and perform a homing attack. And before getting her first timepiece, she got herself a trusty umbrella to smack her enemies into oblivion. Didn't think an umbrella could be that deadly. And later on, she also got a bat if that's more your speed for breaking ankles. Since she is in fact named Hat Kid, you might expect her to have some hat tricks. And while her basic hat is more or less for show, through collecting these yarn balls, she made herself more hats that give her special abilities. The sprint hat lets her run faster. The brewing hat lets her throw explosive potions. The ice hat encases her in ice, making for a good defense and offense in the air. The Dweller's mask lets her interact with normally intangible platforms, and the Time Stop hat slows down time itself, albeit for only a few seconds. Also, thanks to our pals at Gears for Breakfast, Hat Kid gained access to some crossover powers like Sash Lilac's Dragon Cyclone, Rasputin's Levitation Ball, the Drifter's Dashes, and Nico's Sun Bowl. But hats aren't the only thing Hat Kid's got. Through some business exchanges from this weird glitchy salesman, she got herself several badges to attach to her hat. While some just alter the aesthetic of the people in the world, many of them grant her extra abilities like a laser, a hook shot, reduced cooldowns on her hat abilities, and transforming her sprint hat into a scooter. All this stuff is neat and all, but what about that time Hat Kid ended up in the Amazon rainforest? Should that be counted? Well, your first instinct might be no, since Tunche is a separate game, but considering Hat Kid is a space explorer and heavily featured in the promotional material, and her inclusion is officially endorsed by Gears for Breakfast without anything contradicting the main events of A Hat in Time, I'd say it's fair game to use. In which case, that gives her several perks featured in the game, such as potions to heal herself, spiritual cores that add all sorts of effects to her attacks, and Aya Vines which briefly buff her stats and even negate damage inflicted onto her. It's honestly a good thing she had all these abilities because she was going to need them to get her timepieces back, as many of the residents had gotten their hands on them, discovering the power they held and wishing to use it for themselves, including another kid named Mustache Girl, who saw the timepieces as her solution to ridding the planet of the Mafia for good. I mean, who could really blame her? These timepieces are shown to be able to alter time itself, whether through rewinding it or even traveling through it, causing the world around you to change. Heck, a few even created their own pocket dimensions upon landing on the planet, and while Hackett primarily used them to fuel her ship, she's also confirmed that she's well aware of the power they hold, and did use them at the end of the game to undo the damage done to the world. So despite the fact that it's not necessarily within her character to use them like this, it also doesn't mean she won't use them if forced to. Not like she really needs to, considering she survived direct hits from rockets, falling out of her ship all the way down to the planet without a scratch, and having her soul removed by the sleazy ghoul named the Snatcher. In fact, the only difference between her having and not having a soul is how empty she feels inside, which is more than normal. Of course, it's only assuming you can hit her at all, considering how fast her reaction speed is, and I should probably explain this before I get into it. When it comes to power scaling, speed is usually separated into two categories: travel speed and reaction speed. Travel speed relates to how fast someone can move for long stretches without the aid of a vehicle, usually involving running or flying if that's possible for them. And reaction speed relates to how fast someone can move in short bursts, like to dodge a projectile or pilot a vehicle of any kind. Typically, when it comes to the two speed types, people often tend to conflate them, and in some cases, they aren't wrong to do so. After all, if a character can run faster than sound, it stands to reason they can react just as quickly, otherwise they never process what's in their way as they're running. However, the inverse is not always true, since it relies a lot more on reflex movement rather than prolonged movement. As an example, a character could be able to jump out of the way of a lightning bolt, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can run as fast as said lightning bolt. The reason I'm bringing this up is not only do I feel it's a bit overlooked when it comes to power scaling, but also because it applies heavily to our two combatants. You'll hear Astro Bot's case later, but in Hackid's case, her travel speed isn't anything special both with and without the sprint hats, but her reaction speed is quite impressive as she's able to dodge laser beams, jump all the way from her ship to a moving train in just a few moments, and pilot said ship as it's flying throughout space. Now, some have called that into question since we rarely see the ship moving, but I personally believe it considering she built the damn thing, it was stopped by a random mafia goon, and there's an NPC that takes vacation trips to the moon and the sun of all things. With that said, we're shown at the start of the game that Hackid is halfway to her home planet with the computer on her shit stating she's 5 light years away. And since she was able to catch some Z's at the end of the game, we'll be generous and assume the time it took for her to reach home was about 7 hours, which is the minimum recommended amount of time you should sleep at night. So distance divided by time gives us the rough estimate of the shit's fastest speed being 4.2 trillion miles per hour, or 6,259 times the speed of light. That is really impressive to say the least, and it paid off when things took a turn for the worse. After battling her way across the regions, nabbing every last timepiece she could find, Mustache Girl raided Hatkid's ship and used the timepieces to alter reality into one where she was judge, jury, and executioner for all the planet's inhabitants. Not only that, but when Hatkid rose to fight her, she used the timepieces again to create the Hyperzone, a multicolored void containing thousands of stars within and could potentially encompass the entirety of the universe, given how singular timepieces created those rifts in time and space, as I mentioned earlier. Though that wasn't the only time these two would fight, as not long afterwards, the Snatcher created several Death Wish challenges, recreating every timepiece and every boss fight but stronger, including Mustache Girl, and even used it to buff himself to become even more powerful than he already was, which easily makes the Snatcher at best a potential low multiversal threat that Hatkid had to face. Most children would probably quake in terror at the sight of these insurmountable odds, but despite it all going against her, Hatkid never gave up. With her raw determination and a little help from the locals, she triumphed over Snatcher's death wishes and Mustache Girl's tyrannical reign. And though some tears were shed from the locals and even herself, Hatkid returned to her ship, ready to head back home. She made a lot of enemies, but also some friends, even unintentionally, and that was ultimately the hidden beauty of her journey. Whether she makes it back home or stumbles across another planet to explore, she made her mark on this one, and they'll always remember the girl that took back time. The Sony PlayStation, one of gaming's greatest and longest running consoles since 1995, with 5 more editions and several accessories following suit. Seeing as they were so big, PlayStation naturally needed a mascot, but rather than simply sticking with one forever like Nintendo did with Mario or Sega did with Sonic, Sony seemed to alternate mascots throughout the years, with each console era having its own front-running character to represent it. Then came the year 2020, where at long last, Sony decided to make one character that could serve as a representation for all things PlayStation. He'd be small, he'd be iconic, he'd be the leader of hundreds of other robots just like him, living directly inside your PlayStation 5. And his name would be Astro Bot. Now, to clarify some things real quick, I am aware that there are technically 5 games that are part of the Astro Bot series. However, Astro doesn't appear in the Playroom, and his only relevance in the Playroom VR is basically a demo for Astro Bot Rescue Mission. So we won't be discussing either of those in this video, nor are we going to assume that anything any random bot can do applies to Astro on the blanket term of him being their leader. They made him distinct for a reason, and we've never seen him actually use a lot of the stuff shown in the Playroom VR, mostly due to him not being a character until Rescue Mission. We're only looking at the stuff Astro's actually been in, and the stuff he's actually used, just to avoid any excessive speculation we might have to do. With all that established, our little Astro Bot is surprisingly capable for a tiny robot. He can throw some mean hands, spin around like a whirligig, hover with his jet boosters, and use those same jet boosters to break glass surfaces. In certain situations, he's got a built-in hang glider for gliding, a swim ring for swimming, and an umbrella for staying dry in the rain. Furthermore, across his ship are several other power-ups like a bow and arrow, a Gatling gun that shoots balls, and several other machines to help him jump, roll, climb, and soar his way through obstacles. Or at least whatever obstacles happen to show up on his ship, because believe it or not, Astro's life has been relatively stress-free. You would think the platforming mascot of PlayStation would be some adventuring hero, but he and the other bots would rather just spend their days partying, having fun, and reminiscing about the joys of PlayStation, even a little too much. A simple life for simple bots, and they were simply happy to live it. That is until all that changed when during one of their space parties, they encountered the space bully Nebulax, a childish alien that grabbed their ship and ripped out its CPU just because it could. And that caused a chain reaction that sent every bot and multiple ship parts flying across the galaxy, and what was left of the PS5 ship crashing onto a nearby planet. Such an event left Astro a wreck, but after some repairs, he got back on his feet ready to save his friends, repair his ship, and take down the space bully. Of course, going across the cosmos is no easy feat, so it's lucky for him that his special controller ship was there to help him on his way. While its main purpose is for Astro to fly to different planets and solar systems, the ship is also built with a few different features like a hook shot, a water cannon, rapid-fire shurikens, and a machine gun/laser cannon to shoot down enemies. And in the event Astro is heavily damaged, it can repair him good as new in just a few seconds, assuming he can't already revive himself with some spare hearts anyways. Aboard this controller ship, Astro flew from planet to planet, crossing several dozen light years in mere moments, and slowly but surely rescuing each and every bot and part to get back home. And along the way, he acquired even more power-ups to help him do it. Octo Balloon lets him float through the air and force feed enemies air until they blast off again. Twin Frog Gloves lets him smack enemies with extendable limbs, swing across gaps, and launch himself into parts unknown. Barkster the Bulldog Booster lets him blast forward through just about anything in his way. Monkey Climber lets him climb up walls and throw anything he can pick up. Micro Mouse Shrinker lets him shrink down and explore the smallest areas. Elephant Hose Nose sucks up any liquid to turn into unique platforms, whether they're bouncy, icy, or leafy. Slow-mo Vision lets him temporarily slow down time. SpongeBot lets him absorb and release water and smash through a bunch of stuff while giant. And Chicken Booster lets him blast upwards with incredible power, in addition to other power-ups like a magnet, steel ball armor, and a penguin to boost swimming. Easily a very stacked arsenal, and one that was essential for him to take down all manner of enemies, big and small, old and new. But upon rescuing some specific bots cosplaying as famous PlayStation icons, they lent him their weapons which gave Astro the powers of these icons. Spike from Ape Escape, Kratos from God of War, Nathan Drake from Uncharted, Loco Loco from Loco Loco, and Aloy from Horizon. The powers and weapons they wielded were his for a time, letting him catch apes in a net, smack and freeze enemies with the Leviathan axe, blast away with a gun, roll around as a ball and split into a dozen smaller balls, and snipe enemies with a bow and a slowed down perspective. Though, for as much as I joked about Kratos scaling in a previous video, it is important to note that these powers don't give him the canon stats of the characters they're based on. As hilarious as that would be, nothing in the game actually insinuates that these guys are as powerful as their canon counterparts. And while they share a similar look and abilities as the originals, their stats just remain the same with maybe a slight increase here or there. With that said, there is another question we should ask that might be important for Astro. If he can obtain the powers of these 5 cosplaying bots, would that mean he could obtain the powers of all the other cosplaying bots? Because there are a lot of them seen around the crash site, and if yes, that would give him even more abilities than he already has. Well, the thing is, that might be plausible in theory, but considering there's also a costume shot that lets him wear many of the same outfits as many of the cosplaying bots, it's a bit tricky to say whether or not he can just based on him gaining the powers of the 5 others. Sure, he might be able to do it in a future game, but until then we wouldn't be able to say for certain what he would get without a lot of speculation. Unless you went and examined all their animations in the crash site, but by that metric, most of them wouldn't be very useful at all.
I've killed it.
Regardless of all that, Astro eventually succeeded in rescuing every last bot and repairing the ship to almost peak condition, until it all culminated in one last battle against the space bully Nebulax for the CPU. And what a battle it was! All of the bots using every piece of PlayStation media, soaring through space thousands of times faster than light, and shooting through the Nebulax brigade with everything they had. And after a tough tussle with Nebulax involving a bit of luck and all the power-ups he had, Astro Bot sent him packing and rescued the CPU. Before Nebulax accidentally created a black hole and tried to take Astro out with him. Though the bots and all their loyalty tried to save him, Astro couldn't bear to see them die, and thus sacrificed himself in a cosmic blast, saving them all at the cost of him and Nebulax's lives. I'm just kidding, he survived with some major damage, and with some extensive repairs, he was back on his feet in no time. Sadly, Nebulax survived it too, but that's a problem for another day. For now, with everyone safe and the ship repaired, the bots were back to partying on their cosmic cruise with their leader and hero Astro at the helm. So whenever you boot up your PS5, always be sure to remember the little bot inside, because play has no limits, and neither does he. So, with everything established for these two characters, who really wins between Hat Kid and Astro Bot? Well, to get the tertiary factors out of the way, both would be around the same level of intelligence despite their silliness, and counting Tunche in the DLC would make their experience and fighting skill around the same ballpark. But as far as the most important factors to consider in a fight like this, let's start off with their power. How hard they can hit, and frankly, that's no contest. While Astro Bot is fairly strong himself, being able to hurt space bully Nebulax who survived that black hole, Hat Kid could tangle with Mustache Girl, a potential universe-destroying threat, as well as a Snatcher and his stronger version of Mustache Girl, which is leagues above anything Astro has shown. Now, there is potentially a way you can get Astro to solar system level, but I didn't mention that in this section because, well, one, I didn't want to undercut the mood, but more importantly, the argument is very flimsy to say the least. It mainly comes from the fact that the SSD on Astro's ship contains vast star systems within it, and people have assumed that since Nebulax destroyed the SSD along with the rest of the ship, he should have solar system levels of power. Except Nebulax didn't destroy the SSD, at least not directly. The only thing he did was tear out the CPU and blast away with it, and that caused a chain reaction that resulted in the rest of the ship exploding into pieces. He didn't crush it with his bare hands or anything, and even if you did give him this scaling, it would only really get close to Hat Kid's lowest scalings without the DLC, which is still around multi-solar system given the thousands of stars contained within the hyperzone. So unless you buff Astro and seriously nerf Hat Kid, power goes to Hat Kid by a country mile. Speed, however, is a different story. Obviously, their basic travel speeds aren't anything to write home about, even with their scooter and vehicles, but both of their reaction speeds allow them to pilot spaceships capable of interstellar travel. While I was able to calculate an approximate top speed for Hat Kid's ship, Astro's controller ship is a bit trickier given how the world map was presented. But despite that, he'd still have the edge since it can travel way more light years in significantly less time. Hell, there are even moments where Astro has tagged his ship mid-flight, so it's no contest that Astro would have better reaction speed. Of course, simply being stronger or faster isn't all there is to any fight, so let's talk about their abilities. As you might have gleaned from their sections, Astro has a lot more stuff than Hat Kid. Even affording her stuff from official mods and Tunche, Astro's arsenal is simply a lot bigger and much more unorthodox, and with multiple means of navigation and attack, it's always possible he could overwhelm Hat Kid. That being said, while Astro certainly takes quantity, he doesn't succeed so well in quality. Despite having a ton of offensive abilities, he's surprisingly lacking in defensive abilities beyond the steel ball, which isn't totally invincible, nor does he have many ways to repair himself beyond his ship and very limited supply of hearts. In fact, despite its speed, the ship stopping to repair Astro would leave it open for Hat Kid to destroy. She's got the power to do so, and the ship isn't exactly a tank. Sure, slow-mo vision would be able to counter the time stop hat, but Hat Kid's multiple potions, spiritual cores like regeneration, leech, and second chance, and the timepieces rewinding time would quickly undo any damage that Hat Kid received, on top of the Aya Vines boosting her stats and other spiritual cores like burn, poison, and paralysis severely debilitating Astro, none of which he really has a counter for. Still, given this is more of a quantity versus quality situation, I'll be generous and grant both of them this category. So with relatively equal abilities, Hat Kid being stronger and Astro being faster, the final straw that I'd say determines the winner is durability. Who is the tougher of the two that would allow them to survive the other's onslaught until they get the win? Well, it's sad to say, but this is where PlayStation's slogan doesn't hold water. Even ignoring Hat Kid's better means of healing and defense, the durability difference is clear from the start of their games, as both begin with them crashing onto a nearby planet, but while Astro is heavily damaged by the impact, Hat Kid is perfectly fine, and continues to be fine every time she jumps down. Sure, the black hole explosion would buff Astro's durability to star level, but it also left him in serious need of repairs, requiring all new limbs and a new heart for good measure. Meanwhile, Hat Kid's over here taking blows from universal to potentially multiversal level threats, and being no worse for wear. It honestly sums up them both as fighters pretty well. Hat Kid's an all-rounder, Astro's a glass cannon. He may be astronomical in our hearts, but time was simply bought on his side. Hats off, folks, because the winner is Hat Kid. So what'd y'all think of the first episode of this new series? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm open to criticism regarding this series since I want it to be ongoing for a good while. I specifically chose this matchup to start with because not only do I positively love both games, but I've also grown to really like the matchup itself. In fact, it might just be my favorite option for Hat Kid. I'd have to think about that a bit more since I do still have a soft spot for Beebs, but it's easily my favorite option for Astro Bot, especially since the rest of his spread can be summed up as, oops, all Nintendo. Whatever the case, that's going to do it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you look forward to what's coming next. We are approaching this channel's 5-year anniversary after all, so maybe a remake of one of my oldest countdowns is in order. I've already remade 2 of them, and they say good things come in 3s. See you next time, everybody!